recorded.
Thanks, Judith. And good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. And welcome to the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection's stakeholder meeting for New Jersey Administrative Code Title VII, Chapter 36, subchapters 25 and 26, dealing with the post-Green Acres funding requirements for local park land. This meeting was advertised for members of the public, but it's kind of free for all. So our nonprofit and local government partners are also welcome to attend this meeting. And it's for the new rulemaking that we're doing in the Office of Transactions and Public Land Administration, or OTPLA for short, OTPLA. And today is January 31st, 2023, and this meeting will take place from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Folks are not required to stay on the whole time, but you're welcome to, and we'll be here the whole time. And my name is Caroline Keefe, and I'm the Regulatory Officer in the Public Land Compliance section of the Office of Transactions and Public Land Administration. And I'm going to be your moderator today. I'm helping with Nancy. And I apologize for the smaller slides. My larger screen is just not letting me advance, so I'm using the smaller version of the screen. So, okay. To begin, we're going to review a general disclaimer that the information presented during this meeting is intended to facilitate discussion on various existing and potential regulatory mechanisms. No final agency decision regarding this information is expressed or implied tonight. And just a reminder that this meeting will be recorded. And similar to our other stakeholder meetings, I believe this is our 8th one, am I correct? We're going to be taking attendance. For those attending via the Teams link, we ask that you please put your first and last name and affiliation in the chat box in lieu of a sign-in sheet. And if you've dialed into the meeting or cannot access the chat box, please email your name, phone number, and affiliation to our email address, otpla@dep.nj.gov. That information is in the chat for folks who don't have access. I'll say it one more time, otpla@dep.nj.gov. And that's how we're going to keep attendance. And to review the speaking guidelines and etiquette, during the meeting, we ask that you please make sure your microphone is muted and your camera is turned off. And to request the opportunity to respond or ask a question. For those who have access to the chat, if you could please put your name and affiliation in the chat. And when called on to speak, you may unmute yourself, and if you'd like, turn on your camera. And when you finish speaking, we ask that you please remute yourself and turn off your camera. And for those who are calling in or don't have access to the chat, we're going to be taking breaks probably through the middle and towards the end. If we have some lulls, we can try the raise hand function. So you'll also be getting a chance to speak. So I think, let's see how many folks now. Can't quite see how many on, but I think it depends on how many we have on tonight. But for some of our meetings that have been pretty full, we've been allotting 3 minutes per speaker. And we kind of see how that goes. If time permits, we allow more time for each individual speaker. And for technical problems, we ask that you please either ask for assistance in the chat or send an email to our email address at otpla@dep.nj.gov. And all are welcome to submit written comments and questions to the OTPLA rulemaking team. Judah, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're accepting comments through the month of February, and we'll continue to accept them. It's just that they're going to be more meaningful, and it will be easy for us to address and consider things. The sooner you get in the comments, the better. And just please make sure when you email us at our email address, if you put rulemaking in the subject line, that helps us keep track of those. Okay, at this time, I'd like to introduce Judith N.J.A.C. She's the Assistant Director in the Office of Transactions and Public Land Administration. Judith's going to be leading this portion of the meeting. So I yield the floor to you, Judith.
Thank you, Caroline. So some of you may know that we had a reorganization almost a year ago at this point. Up until that time, Nancy Lawrence, who's also helping us moderate, Wave to the camera, Nancy, thank you. And Caroline and I were part of the Green Acres program. And we and another section from Green Acres were pulled into this new office called Transactions and Public Land Administration. The purpose of the reorganization was to centralize certain functions, including legal review of contracts and grants, which we're not here to talk about tonight, and legal oversight of both DEP-owned land and preserved land in which the department has an interest, such as Green Acres encumbered parkland. So I'll warn you that we're probably not really going to be able to read the fine print on this chart, but this is just an overview. So what some of you may have known as the former Bureau of Legal Services and Stewardship in the Green Acres program is now the Public Land Compliance section within the Office of Transactions and Public Land Administration. That's the center part of the chart in the light orange. And that's the section that's most directly responsible for the parts of the rules that we're talking about today. And Nancy Lawrence, who's helping us moderate, is the manager of that section. Over on the left, where it says Public Land Administration, some of you may know that section as having been the Office of Leases and Concessions that was formerly part of the Office of the Assistant Commissioner for Natural and Historic Resources. That assistant commissionership no longer exists, and the Office of Leases and Concessions was incorporated into the new office. The Public Land Administration section is headed by Adria Wenzel. Over on the right, in kind of the pale purple color, is what we now know as our Legal and Transactional Operations section. This is essentially the Green Acres closing team, headed by Lauren Persida as the manager, and mostly contains our paralegals who help handle our real estate closings and several attorneys who review contracts and grants for the department as a whole. The new office is headed up by Rob Guzak as our director, and as Caroline mentioned, I'm the assistant director. So again, this office was intended to bring a lot of functions related to administration of both the department's own land and other publicly preserved land into one place to ensure consistency of decision-making and hopefully over time to improve the efficiency in how we respond to requests to use properties, both DEP owned and locally owned. So for purposes of the upcoming rulemaking, our team is Rob Guzak, our director, myself, Nancy Lawrence, and Caroline Keefe. And what we're here to talk about today is what right now is part of the Green Acres rules. And if you go to the chat where you're entering your name and your affiliation, at the very top of the chat for this hearing, we provided some links. One is to the existing rules. One is to a hot topics document that I'll talk about in a minute. We also included our main email address. And right now, subchapters 25 and 26 of the Green Acres rules apply to post-funding compliance requirements. Subchapter 25 outlines what our expectations are as far as managing property if you take Green Acres funding to acquire or develop it. And for purposes of non-profits, we're not talking about unfunded parkland or recreation and open space inventories because that requirement doesn't apply to nonprofits, but for municipalities and counties, the recreation and open space inventories are part of the equation. So the rules in subchapter 25 apply to both directly funded parkland and to that unfunded parkland, which are the other parks that are placed on recreation and open space inventories as a condition of taking funding, again, if you're a municipality or county. And then subchapter 26 is primarily what people know as our diversion application process. So for those occasions where someone wants to request that a Green Acres restriction be lifted from a property, subchapter 26 has a pretty detailed process for how you can make that request. We last made substantive changes to these rules in 2005, and those of you who have attended the State Land Trust Conference or other presentations that we've given over the last several years have heard been hearing us say for a long time that we intended to update the rules, and the time has come. But with the new reorganization, we're going to pull subchapters 25 and 26 out of the Green Acres rules and put them in a new chapter specific to the new office. There may be other topics that we end up covering in those rules as well, pertaining to procedures for doing things on DEP property, but that's not what we're here to discuss today. And we're also not here to discuss how you obtain Green Acres funding and what the process is for funding. Green Acres is actually having some workshops about that right now because they're in the middle of a funding round, and you can find information about that on the Green Acres website. What we're here to talk about today is what happens after you have the ribbon cutting on your project and you hand out the big fake check, and Martha Sapp, the director of Green Acres, hands the file to Nancy Lawrence and says, "Here, we did this great project and you need to keep track of it for all time to make sure that the property we helped buy or develop stays as parkland." So we're here today to listen to those of you who've had experience with our post-funding requirements, talk about what you like, what you don't like, what you think we should change. I believe there's been a little concern about the hot topics document that we distributed at the beginning of the stakeholder process back in November. We developed that document as a tool to spur discussion in these stakeholder meetings, but to some degree, the topics listed there reflect things we get asked about on a regular basis and that we think we might have to address in the new rules. But I do want to put it out there just right up front that there was some reaction to the fact that we listed leases as a hot topic. And some may not be aware that we do currently review leases of funded parkland and pretty often for unfunded parkland as well. And we wanted feedback on that process, whether it's too difficult, whether there's other things we should consider. It was not intended to be a prompt that we are considering wholesale commercialization of local parks. So I just would like to put that concern to rest up front if I can. And as Caroline already mentioned, and as is stated on that list, the list is just for discussion purposes. We have not made any firm decisions about what the new rules will say. We really do want people's feedback, and this is just one of several meetings where we've tried to solicit that. As Caroline mentioned, I think it is the last meeting. We had meetings starting in November, and this is our 8th. As Caroline mentioned, we did in some of the meetings have to limit the time for comment. We seem to have about 10 or 12 members of the public on the line right now, so I think we probably don't have to impose a strict 3-minute time limit, but if you could limit your comments so that everybody gets a chance to comment, we can certainly circle back to people at the end once everyone's had a chance. I think, again, with this number of commenters, we can probably have a little bit of a dialogue and answer questions if you have them about the rules. We will be posting a recording of this hearing on the website where you would have gotten the link to join this meeting. The videos of the prior stakeholder meetings are posted there as well. I realized right before the meeting started that I had not posted the videos for the 2 meetings last week on the 24th and the 26th. We do have those ready, and when this meeting is over, I will post them most likely tomorrow. So if you weren't able to attend prior sessions, you can certainly go back and view those videos. And as Caroline mentioned, you can feel free to submit a written comment, either if there's something you don't want to say on the record today or something occurs to you afterwards that you want to bring to our attention, or you just want to go into more detail about whatever issue you're commenting on. And I do agree that the sooner we receive those comments, the better. We have a general direction to accomplish as much of this rulemaking process this calendar year as we can. It's probably a little too ambitious to have the rules fully adopted by the end of the calendar year, but we certainly plan to propose something in 2023 that would then be subject to further public comment. There's a pretty formal process we have to follow for rulemaking. We have to put a written proposal out to the public, at which point our ability to change the proposal is somewhat limited. So if there's a particular topic that you're concerned about and you want to engage us on, please send written comments. And we're also available, to arrange specific discussions about the topics that might be of concern to your organization or town or county, and we have some of those scheduled. So with that said, I will turn this back over to Caroline and Nancy to moderate. As I said, I'll jump in to answer questions or to engage in dialogue as things go along.
Okay, I think I see, I just started a new entry in the chat saying we could start discussion by putting your name and affiliation in there. And I see someone above that said they have to leave, but they're going to submit written comments. So yeah, we encourage written comments. We'll be checking that frequently.
Does the person who needs to leave at 6:30 want to comment on the record before she leaves? We can take you first if you'd like.
Sure. I would love that.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'm Iona Connor in Brick, and I just became the Ocean County coordinator for the Old Growth Forest Network, and I'm starting this volunteer job tomorrow. So I am primarily interested in saving as many ancient trees and living trees as humanly possible because of climate change and the disastrous consequences of not doing as much as we can with nature-based solutions while the rest of the world is running around looking for technology solutions. I will gather up my thoughts more succinctly and hopefully talk to somebody because I'm really new at this, and thank you so much for letting me go first.
You're welcome. I will mention that forestry on parkland has been a hot topic and something we do know that we're going to have to address in the new rules. Excuse me. And, it is possible that some of what your organization would be concerned about is something that park owners would have to do on a voluntary basis. But we'd be interested in hearing your thoughts, and we have been getting some similar comments up until now.
Good. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I think I just saw Sylvia Solano from New Jersey Forest Watch raised her hand, but then I didn't see where it went. Sylvia, if you're there.
Oh, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. Well, first of all, I want to thank you all for, again, offering the ability for us in the public as well as for our organization, which is New Jersey Forest Watch. And our group, for those who don't remember or recall what we do, but for the last 6 years, our group has been documenting, and unfortunately, we've been trying to stop some of the deforestation that's been happening on public lands like Sparta Mountain and Weldon Brook, just to name 2 Green Acre properties. And I'd like to encourage this group to really look at stronger emphasis of forest cover protections. Many of our forests in New Jersey not only provide habitat to species that need an intact forest canopy, but also for the reasons that Iona mentioned with regards to climate mitigation and water. We forget that the highlands and the pinelands, for that reason, for that matter, offer New Jersey residents clean water. And if we allow, under the guise of stewardship, for example, deforestation, that it is going to negatively affect all of us. And I would hope that with Green Acres forests, we need to think of them as a climate solution, our water, our air, And so we encourage our group, especially because we've seen a lot of the degradation that's happened when removal of the trees happens, especially with heavy equipment. And I know I've given comment before, but our group has unfortunately seen a lot of the degradation with severe rutting, new roads created, ATV activity, now in lands that were supposedly saved for conservation and for recreation. And so one of the major points that you'll hear with the promoters of logging is that they'll say that, you know, our forests are even aged, or that the forests are, we need younger forests, for example. And I'd like to encourage this group to understand that there are maybe more appropriate areas for young forests, such as post-ag lands and brownfields, but you don't take a healthy, intact forest canopy and then fragment it by taking out the bigger trees and the larger trees. And what our group has been able to demonstrate is that there's a lot of damage that's been occurring, and you know, we need to protect our forests. There should be no removal of timber on our green acre lands, because these are public trust resources. They provide us with so many different ecosystems services. And so we would like to really encourage the DEP, and especially Green Acres, to put stronger emphasis on protections of forests. Thank you.
Thank you. That's helpful. Bob Moss, you're next. I just want to make one comment, and you touched on it just slightly.
Sure.
The overarching definition for Green Acres is recreation and conservation purposes. That's what Green Acres is allowed to give money to acquire land for recreation and conservation purposes, and is also allowed to fund what are called park development projects, again, for recreation and conservation purposes. You were mostly talking about something different, but I just want to put on the record that if a park owner decides to clear trees for a recreation purpose, we're generally powerless to stop that because it's within that definition. I think over the years, the Green Acres program has tried to find ways to disincentivize tree clearing for recreation and to, you know, pull back funding where it can. But ultimately, if a park owner wants to clear forest for recreation, there's not a whole lot we can do about that other than try to make sure the public is fully informed as to what's about to happen. So just wanted to put that on the record as food for thought. Okay. Bob Moss.
Yes, hi. I'm glad you introduced that before I spoke, Judith. I may not be saying anything new. I feel like I don't always do my best job the first time, so I'm taking advantage of this second opportunity. Maybe I can do better. And Judith, I agree with Judith absolutely, and I have mentioned in emails, I forget which ones went to whom, but I have over the years given this as an example, Morris County, and that may not actually be Green Acres. I don't know if that was only county land. It could have been the open space trust funds for the counties. But same idea. They cleared forest for a golf course, and those of us on this side were going nuts. And I said, well, you know what? You can't do anything about it, except scold New Jersey Conservation Foundation, because they're I think it's N.J.A.C. Their office was in the Morris County Parkland. So that is true. And unfortunately, a lot of things I would prefer to be different about Green Acres, as good a program as it is. So now we go back to the so-called forest management or forest stewardship. And we have, I want to just nail down a specific position that I believe Office of Green Acres, or OTPLA, if I have that right, is holding this specific position that with respect to, well, let me say it this way. This came out, and for a couple years, several years actually, since this plan came out, I have been pushing and pushing and pushing. No conservation purpose is stated for removal of logs for sale on the commercial market. This is the Sparta Mountain Plan. That's the one I'm really most familiar with. No conservation purpose is stated, and the plan specifically states the opposite. It's an opportunity for revenue generation, and we would be remiss from a management point of view. And they don't mean, managing their finances. They would remiss to not take advantage of it. And I said, no, you got to have a conservation purpose. So now, no more than 2 years ago, that's like 3 years later, I've been harping on this, and all of a sudden, and I've sent the emails. I don't have the names in my head. All of a sudden, somebody in the office there said, "Oh, there is a conservation purpose: enhanced regeneration." And what I want to know that the last time I was on the meeting, and Judith, I believe it was you specifically said it, you're deferring to whatever the DP or the whatever agency it is that's generally manages state land. And again, for the wildlife management areas, you're deferring to them on whether this is a permitted use, what they're doing, that forest management plans and forest stewardship plans. Now, when somebody comes up, it's not in the plan. Enhanced regeneration is not in the plan. I've been harping about it. You don't have a conservation purpose in the plan. So they come up with something that's not in the plan. It's not defined. We don't know what enhanced regeneration means. I mean, do the trees grow faster? Do they grow more slowly so the young forest is there longer? We just don't know. There is no citation to authority. Judith, I believe you're a lawyer, so you know that language. The authorities would be journal articles, and there's not even a citation to the ubiquitous in the Sparta Mountain Plan. There's no citation to the ubiquitous personal communications from so and so, Joe Blow, which I don't believe are adequate. But the plan is full of them. But they don't even have that for their enhanced regeneration. All I've been able to find so far, I have asked the question, not getting an answer. What's backing up this claim? So does the OTPLA people, do the OTLA people still defer to, I don't know if Sylvia, does she knows whatever agency is running this plan, whether it's a Fish and Wildlife, or I think it is Fish and Wildlife because it's a wildlife management area. Are you still deferring to them on this particular question? The conservation purpose is allegedly enhanced regeneration, and we don't have any backup, and we don't know what it means. Are you still deferring to them?
So a couple of things. The rules we're here to discuss apply to local parkland, so it has to be owned by municipality, county, or nonprofit. The office itself has some functions that pertain to DEP land, particularly when it comes to leasing out land, but day-to-day management of those lands is under the purview of Fish and Wildlife, or what's now Parks, Forest, Historic Sites, something or other. So, what we used to call Parks and Forestry. So day-to-day management, land managers, boots on the ground, are Fish and Wildlife, Parks and Forestry. If something needs to be leased out, that's under the purview of the new office. So I have no involvement in whether Fish and Wildlife, in its day-to-day land management responsibilities, develops a forest stewardship plan that it then submits to somebody else for approval, or maybe approval isn't even needed, I don't know, to carry out its management objectives. I did say on the record the other day, and this is an accurate statement, that when controversies have arisen on local parks that arise from that park owner having submitted a forest stewardship plan to forestry at DEP and getting that plan approved, we used to be Green Acres, now OTPLA, have felt that we're not in a position to second guess the judgment of the forestry program in approving that plan. And I don't have the forest stewardship statute in front of me, but my very rudimentary understanding of those plans were that the whole reason that legislation got passed was to kind of bring forestry more in the sphere of conservation and land protection, as opposed to the commercial logging that used to get approved for the purposes of farmland assessment, the woodland management plans. So when that statute was passed, I thought it was to move things more in the direction of conservation. Maybe I'm wrong about that. What I will also say, though, is this is a hot topic. We've gotten a lot of outcry over these projects when they've started to be conducted on public parkland. literally when the chainsaws go out to the property and then people realize that there's a plan that was approved that's being implemented. And, we realize we need to say more about that. What exactly we're going to say, I don't know. And it also meshes with the fact that because of Sparta, there's a forestry task force that's examining this whole process and is literally about to make recommendations to Senator Smith that may result in changes to the legislation, changes to other DEP processes. So I don't know how the timing is going to work out as far as us being tasked with doing this rule this calendar year and this forestry task force working on a parallel track and making recommendations that might not be able to be implemented right away. So we're struggling with this issue. We're welcoming everybody's input, but ultimately we're going to have to pull it all together and figure out what, if anything, we can do to address the concerns that have been expressed to us. And I will say also in the last meeting and maybe the one before, there were people expressing the opposite opinion, that these plans are good and we should allow them to be implemented. So we are definitely stuck in the middle on this issue.
Okay.
I don't know if there's anything more you want to say about that particular topic, Bob.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I just lost my train. Hold on. Yeah, so I think what I'm hearing is there's all this stuff coming up, and you may be aware that New Jersey Forest Watch and so on have their own opinions about the efficacy of the task force. But all this stuff is coming up. You've got kind of a deadline for your new rules, or you definitely have a deadline, and you're not sure what's going to be in the final recommendations of the task force and so on, and whatever's in there, people are going to keep screaming anyway. But what I think I'm hearing you say is there will be consideration given to figuring out what is OTPLA's role on a question such as this, and particularly this question, is that really a conservation purpose? Or is this, given forest stewardship plan, is it really consistent with Green Acres? It sounds to me, and tell me if I'm wrong, that you're saying we're going to look at this. What can we say about this? What should our role be? And with all this data coming in, it's going to come pouring in the next couple of months. Is that correct?
I think that's accurate. I mean, don't quote me on this particular statement, but I've certainly thought about the fact that we probably could say that if it's Green Acres encumbered park, you shouldn't be removing timber under a woodland management plan, because those were designed for farmland assessment purposes and not for conservation management. So I think there's a couple of steps we can definitely take in that direction. But I'm hearing that there's not a consensus among our constituents that forest stewardship plans are a good thing. So, that you maybe can't trust a forest stewardship plan to be a conservation plan. So I don't know how we're going to reconcile that issue. And what was the other thing about Sparta? Well, yeah, again, it's a little misleading because Sparta was, I think, Nancy, you had occasion to look at this recently, was entirely on state property or primarily on state property?
That's entirely.
Entirely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
well, they make a big.
Excuse
me. They make a big deal about, because there's contiguous areas that are nonprofits.
Okay.
Passaic River Coalition or something. And so they do comparisons and stuff like that. But the actual plan is for the wildlife management area only.
Right. So nothing we can do in these rules would affect the outcome of that in the past or in the future, because subchapters 25 and 26 do not apply to the state as property owner, and they're not going to in the new rules. It's just we generally don't promulgate rules to regulate ourselves, unfortunately. But it almost sounds like you're questioning the premise upon which a forest stewardship plan was approved, and that maybe is a line of inquiry with the forestry program. If you think that the forest stewardship statute requires a conservation purpose and there wasn't one, that sounds to me like a basis you could challenge the plan, but I couldn't even tell you how you would go about doing that. So I should have made it clear. I understand the regulations for the most part, as you explained, apply to local government units and nonprofits. However, you are the Office of Green Acres, you're now your TPLA. I still think of you as the Office of Green Acres, and I want to know if
you're thinking of anything, regulations or outside the regulation, some avenue on which an expression, an opinion could be expressed, or something. Whether it's a conservation purpose, we have no recreation purpose in these plans, so that's out, luckily. Whether it's a conservation purpose or not, can the OTPLA, should it address this one way or another? And I shouldn't have made it sound like in the regulations, because I guess they could. The regulations don't have to be restricted to local government units, do they?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to get into a debate about the APA, but I mean, the whole reason agencies do the Administrative Procedure Act, the whole reason agencies do rules is when they affect people outside the agency, when they take actions that affect people outside the agency, it's fair to give notice and allow comment on those things in advance. There's not really the same rationale when it comes to governing our own operations. So although I mentioned there may be other topics covered in this new chapter that would pertain to DEP property, it was more the process than the substance. It was how do you make a request to do X, Y, or Z, just as a way to inform people, but not because it's strictly required. Just to go back to your question, my honest answer right now is I don't know if we're going to take a position on that or not. And I really think the task force is going to have a bearing on that, depending on what their recommendations are and what DEP management decides to do with them. So I just think that's something I can't predict right now.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So I think Mia Baldwin was next.
Hi, thank you for having us on this meeting. I have a question about restoration projects on Green Acres property, mostly in regards to the stewardship application. You have eligible projects listed and ineligible projects listed. And according to that list, there are some green infrastructure projects that are eligible. Does that mean that, like I saw, I'm sorry if I'm jumping all over the place, but on previous meetings, green infrastructure was listed as a hot topic. And on that particular stewardship application, there are projects listed. Does that mean that that those particular projects are okayed by Green Acres already?
Do you know offhand what types of projects are listed?
Yes, I see here that meadow, woodland, or wetlands creation, pond restoration, pollinator gardens, invasive species removal, natural stream bank restoration, bird houses, dam removal, and conditionally eligible improvements include creation of a small parking area, outdoor environmental education, appurtenances, trail benches that blend into the natural landscape.
Okay, so those the conditional ones aren't necessarily green infrastructure. I mean,
Okay.
Nancy, you have expertise in this as well, so jump in if you disagree. It sounds to me like the types of things listed there are pretty clearly not what we would call a diversion of parkland, that we would consider it an improvement to the park that also has a green infrastructure purpose. I mean, even though we're not technically part of Green Acres anymore, we do coordinate closely with them, and the objective would be that they wouldn't fund something that this office would not find acceptable or would call it a diversion of parkland. So
yes.
If you want to be doubly sure, if you drop your email address in the chat, we can tell you who the contact person is to screen your project a little more closely. But there's generally not going to be harm in applying for that money. And it does sound to me like they vetted that list of projects with us before they put it out for funding purposes. So, but you know, if you want to double check on that, we can help you get in touch with the right person. Okay. Do we have any other hands up, Nancy?
No, no hands raised.
If additional members of the public want to comment, you can use the raise hand function in Teams. You can drop your name in the chat.
And we do have 2 people joining us via telephone. I don't know if they have questions.
I think we see Dorothea Stillinger.
Go ahead, Dorothea. And after that, Jason Howell. Dorothea, if you are speaking, we can't hear you. You're still muted, but you're the next commenter if you still want to comment.
Go. There we go. Okay. I found the icon. Yes, the Great Swamp Watershed Association was a partner in a number of significant property acquisitions where they partnered with other organizations to obtain Green Acres funds for the properties. About 10 months ago, the Forest Task Force came to the attention of the Watershed Association, and it was with some dismay that the Watershed Association began to look into the consequences of so-called forest stewardship plans. The concept of a forester, a professional whose main activity is to manage trees for profit, having a say in what the Great Swamp Watershed Association does with properties that it has an interest in that have trees on them was almost unbelievable to begin with. So we attended all the task force meetings, and we could go on for hours, but I'm not going to. I'm going to spend maybe a couple more minutes. A couple of things that we think really should be addressed are, maybe first and foremost, a strict definition of conservation purposes. Now, in some of the statutes or the legislative rules, things are enumerated, like the list of C1 streams, for instance. There isn't just a broad definition of C1 streams. There's actually a list of every C1 stream in the state. There is nothing wrong with enumerating things, and we think it would be a good idea for conservation purposes to actually list a specific list of things that count as conservation purposes, so that you remove all ambiguity. Something else that we feel strongly about is that other professionals besides foresters should be involved in creating not a forest stewardship plan, a conservation plan. You hit the nail on the head a moment ago when you mentioned that they should be called conservation plans. That's absolutely what they should be called. And again, we agree that the concept of forest stewardship plans was developed to bring awareness to the idea of not just randomly cutting trees, but doing it with a purpose. We certainly approve that, but not plans approved by foresters, plans approved by specifically other professionals being mentioned, like ecological people who who are involved in ecological restoration, physical scientists, people who have expertise in, for instance, water. So there's that comment. We need to specifically require other professionals than beside foresters, along with foresters, to be involved in approving any conservation plan. And I think it goes without saying that the Watershed Association would certainly oppose any kind of tree removal where there's a financial purpose of any sort. We could never really agree to a plan where the DEP pays somebody to remove trees, or that those trees are sold with the money going elsewhere. That is just, we have not been able to think of any justification for that kind of financial activity to be going on in a plan that's supposed to be for conservation purposes. And we certainly oppose the logging on Sparta Mountain, and I believe there was logging on a Roaring Brook Park and a couple of other places where the removal of the trees was justified on the basis of very shaky science. There needed to be a conservation plan where professionals other than foresters were involved. So having said all that, I think that kind of lays out the Watershed Association's position. And we, going forward, now that we've been made aware of all of this going on, we are going to take attempt to take a more active role in helping to achieve the kind of rules we'd like to see. And thank you for letting me comment, by the way. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for those comments. They're very helpful. We appreciate it. Jason Howell.
So
I think you
I would, can you hear me okay or no?
Now we can. Thanks.
Yeah, okay, great. So one thing, you all might want to take a look at is process that the Outside Together engaged in just recently. It was a long process, and I could see the downsides of having such an extended public comment opportunity, but with the complexity of the rules being discussed, I don't know if there's a meaningful way to really get public comment without having a dedicated group of people really tasked with looking at these things on an ongoing basis, even maybe for months. So, while these are great, having a couple minutes to speak about, one aspect or another, depth of engagement that I think would be necessary for meaningful public engagement, I think is going to be much greater than just this opportunity, these few minutes, these last few meetings. So just to note there, I thought that was an interesting way to go about engaging the public, and something maybe to take a look at. Just another quick topic is one thing going forward, I think we have to really be careful with is the diversion process. I've seen some diversions that personally I didn't think were reasonable to go ahead with based on the types of lands being transferred and compensated with, wetlands for uplands, that kind of thing. So having that process be looked at, I think is going to be really, really important going forward as we reach build out in the state, where, land is going to be increasingly more valuable, and so parkland is going to be increasingly targeted diversion. I don't think it's strict enough now, and that's something I would be very interested in having a more in-depth engagement process to look at what those rules look like. All right, thanks.
Jason, if I could ask you a question.
Sure.
To your last point, when we last did the rules in 2005, we, for the first time, made a distinction between minor and major diversions. And in practice, the minor diversion process has not been significantly less cumbersome than the major diversion process. So we've been trying to find ways to really identify small projects with an obvious public purpose and a relatively small parkland impact, where we could, to the extent we can, trim down the process, not hold up things like intersection improvements or bridge replacements, and not have those types of projects take just as long as pretty major diversions. So the comment you just made, the diversions you observed that you don't think we should have approved, would you categorize those as all relatively major projects, or does your concern extend to the smaller projects?
Yeah, the one that I'm speaking about in particular was a major diversion. So it's many.
Well, I'll also say, wetlands for uplands gets a little tricky because sometimes although the uplands that generally have more real estate value, they don't always have the same ecological value that the wetlands do. So sometimes it's a little hard to make that apples to oranges comparison. I'll also just note that when we last did the rules in 2005, our charge from our commissioner at the time was to raise the bar on diversions, make the process more difficult, which we did by imposing those compensation ratios for the first time. So before that, even though we had a pretty good track record of negotiating better than one-to-one compensation, all that technically was required was one-to-one compensation. So, in the abstract, people look at the rules and say, oh, that's a pretty tough process, and I understand why you have these high compensation ratios, but then when they come before us with their project, they like to complain that the ratios are too high. So I don't know how much higher we might be able to raise that bar when it comes to that, but I do appreciate your comments.
Yeah, it's going to be a big topic. It's going to be a lot of pressure on the man.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it.
I guess that's something just to comment. I mean, we're going to be doing internal stakeholdering as well. And I mean, we do recognize the complexities of these issues and, trying to stay informed, and the public is helping with that. But that's definitely something we do not take lightly. So. And I see Mia Baldwin has her hand up again. Mia?
Yes, I'm sorry. I lost my connection. I did not hear your last statement. You were saying that I should enter my email in the chat and then that's when I got cut off.
Well, you can enter your email in the chat, or if you don't want to disclose that publicly, you can send us an email to the address at the bottom of the slide, otpla@dep.nj.gov.
Yes.
And we can attempt to put you in touch with someone who's involved with the stewardship funding if you want to be doubly sure that your project would be acceptable.
Yes. And I just have one more question. How would I go about if it's a project and I approach my municipality about the project and get approval from them? How would I go about getting approval? Do I have to get approval through Green Acres if it's listed as an eligible project?
The municipality would have to apply. So the parkland owner would have to apply. And I don't specifically know on stewardship funding, but I suspect it's probably one project per municipality. And if they already have another stewardship project in mind, you might have to wait and get on their list of projects.
Yes. Okay. All right.
I mean,
thank
generally,
you.
when Green Acres gives out park development project, I think they only fund one project per funding cycle. So depending on where you are, if your town is already trying to take advantage of that funding, you might have to queue that up for a future funding round.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. I don't think we have any raised hands if anybody else would like to raise their hand to comment. Sylvia, go ahead.
Oh, okay, thank you. Can you explain a little bit what the next steps are? I know you mentioned this a little bit, and before you do that, I just want to comment on some of the comments that were made. It's very interesting when you look at the promoters of logging. I have to say, in our 7-8 year now experience, they tend to be the organizations that benefit from removal of timber harvest. So whether they are in the business of creating forest stewardship plans, or they are the actual loggers or contractors, what our experience has been, when you look at true conservation and ecological restoration, I think that's really what we're looking for. It all can be done without timber removal. And so as part of one of our comments, we will definitely keep putting that out there, because when we think about public lands and think of Green Acres, there are public trust resources, and they should not be sold so that certain private entities could make money. And typically it's done under the guise of perhaps habitat creation, perhaps, quote, healthy forest. But the science, and this is where this team, this DEP team, is so important. I would challenge anyone who states that you have to remove timber. I would challenge them, where's the science that says that it's ecological to do that? Because I have yet to see it. It has never been demonstrated, and the science clearly states the opposite, that you can do true ecological restoration without having to have any type of timber removal. And so I really can't emphasize enough that let's look at this also from a very scientific and true ecological restoration component. And, you know, that phrase, do no harm, should really apply for our public lands, and our public lands really deserve to be held to the highest standard. And unfortunately, they haven't been. I think someone mentioned C1 streams. I mean, there's C1 streams throughout the state, and logging negatively affects that. As soon as you take and remove that forest canopy, you change not only the pH, but you change the water temperature. And many of our C1 streams throughout the state have very sensitive trout producing waters. And as soon as you alter that forested canopy, you're negatively impacted a whole ecosystem, and it's like a downward spiral. And so ecological restoration should really be a key component of our Green Acres lands. And then, now that I've said what I needed to say, can you explain once more just what's going to come out of this public hearing, and what's going to come out of, like, what are the next steps, if you will?
I think we're probably going to spend the month of February organizing the comments we've received both in these stakeholder meetings and in writing, categorizing them as far as what topics they were about, and kind of bulleting probably some of the points that people have raised, and sharing that information with our management team. I think after that is when we'll probably start, you know, seriously putting pen to paper and trying to decide what we want to say. To the point that Jason Howell made a few minutes ago, I could foresee that we might share some of our thinking down the line if we feel like we want further input on particular issues. I don't think we've made any decisions about how we would go about that. But at the end, you know, once we write this entirely new chapter, which will take some time. It'll be based on the existing subchapters, but to create a standalone chapter, there's some basic things you have to do, like pull in a bunch of definitions and just have some organization to the chapter. That's going to take a little time. And at that point, again, we'll consult with our management about whether they see this as a draft for further comment or whether we're at the point where we would propose it more formally. Those of you not familiar with how state agencies in New Jersey have to do rulemaking, there's a publication called the New Jersey Register, which serves all the state agencies and is kind of the official publication of the state when it comes to rulemaking and other certain types of notices. At the point where we think the rule is ready for formal comment, it goes in the register. There's a prescribed period of time to comment on it. I believe there is another public hearing required at that point. And I mentioned kind of in passing that we are limited at that point in the types of changes we can make to what we propose, because we can't destroy the value of the notice that we're giving for what we want to do. So if we propose something, we can't then on final, what they call adoption, do something completely different, because we then haven't given the public a fair opportunity to comment on that. So we can kind of tinker around the edges of the proposal, or we can just say, okay, there was just too much negative comment and we might have to start over again. So how long it's going to take us to get a draft that we could then decide whether to solicit additional public comment or go to a more formal proposal, I can't tell you, other than that our management would like this done sooner rather than later. And, to be fair, we've been talking about doing this for a while, and usually we don't go so long without making significant updates to our rules. There's lots of things at the staff level that we would like to articulate in the rules, because we just get asked about it all the time. So there are things we can say in the rules that will then prevent people from having to ask us for our interpretation of certain things.
Okay.
So, you're welcome to, this is 3/4 of the rulemaking team right here, Nancy, Caroline, and I. You're welcome to drop us a line if you haven't heard anything about what we're doing in a while and you want to know where we are in the process. That's fine.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm not seeing anyone else right now in the chat. I don't see a hand.
I believe we have at least one person on the phone. The number's ending in 5203. I don't know if someone's both on their phone and on the video, but if the person who called in wants to comment, feel free to unmute yourself and let us know.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, that's me. That's Bob Moss. So I'm done for this evening. You can have another hearing. I'll come to it.
I thought it might be, but there was no way to tell. So thank you for
Right.
letting us
It's
know.
weird. But that's the way they did it. I couldn't. Well, I don't have a microphone, so I have. And Teams, I haven't figured out how to call in and hear. Be able to do the chatting and stuff. So anyway, that was me.
Okay. Thank you for letting us know.
Right.
I think the majority of people outside DEP who are on the line have commented, but certainly if you have additional comments or you haven't commented yet, you can let us know now. If there's no additional comment in the next couple of minutes, we will probably do what we did with the last two meetings, which was that we stopped the recording, but we stayed on the line until the announced time of the meeting was over. So tonight that would be 8 o'clock, in case there were people who joined the meeting late and still wanted to go on the record. So if we end up closing hitting stop on the recording in a few minutes, we'll do that same thing. Caroline and I and Nancy will stay on until 8 o'clock to be here if anybody else joins us. but we will resume the recording at that point, and we'll ask our IT people to stitch the two recordings together at the end of it before we post it online. So if people have commented and want to leave the meeting, you won't miss anything. We will record any additional comment that comes later. So I think we'll give it another minute or two and then we'll stop recording.
And maybe I just want to comment some of the written comments we've been getting. Some folks are saying, you know, can I do like a separate letter? Can I do it in an email? Can I have pictures? Can I, you know, cite your literature? I think it's whatever you feel gets your point across, and just, you know, please share your thoughts, experiences, questions, and ideas. So we're all ears.
Everything's fair game at this point. Whatever you want to send us, we will take into consideration. Okay, it's 7:10 for the record. I'm going to hit stop on the recording. Dorothea, before I take John's comment, I don't know if there's anything more you wanted to say.
No, thank you for responding. The Watershed Association is beginning to, the Watershed Association is beginning to really think about these issues in depth, where we haven't had to before, because the issues of foresters telling us what we can and can't do on our property, and the issue and of course there are always financial issues, people wanting to profit from land in the public trust, which land encumbered by Green Acres is. These are issues that we're really beginning to think hard about. So I really appreciate all the information that you folks have put out and all the commenters have said. Thanks again.
No, thank you. We appreciate your input. John Armstrong, would you still like to comment? John, I don't know if you're attempting to comment, but you're muted, and I think there you go.
Sorry, computer issues. I just wanted to say, I was just looking, we've got 20 parks, approximately, large and small, in Bayonne. Some nicely covered in nice grass and trees, and others covered in, playgrounds, that sort of thing. And one of the things that happened, a few years ago, we did a stormwater storage project, which is right next to Bayonne City Hall, with enormous success, I might say. It was we used to have terrible flooding around that area of on Avenue C in Bayonne, around 25th, 26th, 27th, 28th streets, and that storage facility, which we put the storage installations were made, and the park was restored with children's play area, and it looks really, really good. Now we've got parks, as I say, large and small, all over the city of Bayonne, and of course we would dearly love to take advantage for storage of, to put similar storage facilities in those parks. Not the big parks, but some of the smaller parks. I mean, I can think of one right off the top of my head, which is the Cossage Street area of Bayonne, which is right at the end of Bayonne. We want to put somewhere between a 3,000 and 8,000 gallon storage tank. It would help us enormously to solve some of the flooding problems in that area. And I'd just like your comments about how you know, when we do projects like that, how well they would be received. I mean, certainly the one in Fitzpatrick Park, as I say again, was an enormous success, and I can see lots of opportunities where, well, at least 3 or 4 opportunities where we might do the same thing. We've got perhaps 26 or 27 irritating flood areas in Bayonne, and we're trying our best to deal with all of them. The reason why storage is so important is because, you know, we can take some of the stormwater detention in heavy storms. We can retain the stormwater, and instead of flooding people's basements, you know, we can put it in a storage facility and avoid that type of flooding. So really, just if you could comment a little bit on how well received storage facilities underneath parks would be received, would be interesting to me.
So we approved the project in Fitzpatrick Park, although part of our concern there was that we were probably the last approval that was obtained, and we felt like we should have just been consulted earlier in the process. So lesson learned there. I said in one of the prior sessions that, you know, flood control, strictly speaking, is not part of the Green Acres mission, and so we have to be careful about whether the primary purpose of these projects is to protect private property or whether it serves a larger conservation purpose, primarily in the form of watershed protection. And in areas like Bayonne and a lot of the urban areas in North Jersey where combined sewer overflows are still an issue, it's been relatively easy to make the case that any kind of flood control project does prevent, you know, the CSO problem from being exacerbated and does contribute to lessening that problem.
Yes.
So I think a project that's part of the long-term control strategy that, in our opinion, does not completely foreclose surface use of the park or things that might have been planned for the park, we're going to be able to approve. We'd just like to be consulted earlier in the process so we don't feel like we're interfering with people's plans or holding things up. So whether I don't anticipate that we're going to come up with a strict rule of thumb. I think we're just not going to want the basins to take up the entire subsurface of these parks to allow for foundations or backstops or other structures to be installed there. So we're trying to strike a balance, but you know, we were glad to hear a couple of days ago that that project is actually functioning as it was intended. So
I can lay no claim to anything else. It was there before I was employed by the city of Bayonne. I had nothing
Okay.
at all to do with it. It's just that I was a former MUA engineer in Bayonne, but I worked for a private company. The last 3 years I've been employed directly by the city of Bayonne, but I reviewed that while they were building it. I watched them build it, and I've seen the effects of it. So it's a very, very effective project. So I have to thank you for supporting it, because it's been a wonderful success.
Although,
thanks
you
to
know,
whoever engineer designed it. It wasn't me.
Not without controversy at the beginning, though, because there were restrooms there that I think were eliminated as part of the project, and there were what some in the neighborhood considered to be mature trees that they didn't necessarily want to come down for this project, but it involved the balancing of the stormwater controls and the improvements to the park to produce what we're being told is a much more functional park at the end, but certain attributes of the park did have to be sacrificed for that. So it gets very tricky. But again, flood control is not strictly speaking part of the definition, but certainly post Sandy and given climate change, we're looking to accommodate green infrastructure and some of these projects to the extent we can, while not compromising the traditional recreation and conservation purposes of the parks. But you're not going to be able to solve all the problems on the backs of the parks. So
no, absolutely not. No, it's as I say, it's going to be in the smaller areas. I just have one particular issue at the moment. As I said, the Cottage Street area, and there's a small part there. Half of it is grass and half of it's already a kind of softball area. What we'd really like to do is put something underneath the softball area, not just the green bit, but have a storage facility underneath that bit, underneath the ballpark area, which would be an enormous help and solve all the problems. We've had problems as long as I can remember in that area of Bayonne. So anyway,
Well,
no, you're
it
absolutely
sounds
right.
like
You
that
can't-
project's still in the planning stages, so this would be a good time to
Yes.
speak to us about it. So
Yes.
our public land compliance section, which Nancy manages, our staff are assigned by county, and the person assigned to that county is the same person who was there when Fitzpatrick Park was put in front of us. She'll remember Fitzpatrick Park, and she'll be able to help you review that project.
Thanks.
And, you know, just from what you're describing, I think it's probably something that could be accommodated, but we would need to see at least a concept plan or some plans.
Yeah.
I should mention something I mentioned the other day when this topic came up, which is certainly designing a park with stormwater retention features or underground basins is not a problem. It's just when you go to retrofit the park that our compliance section would get involved in deciding, you know, which side of this seesaw it falls on. Does it still honor the Green Acres restriction, or does it go too far in the direction of being primarily to protect private property? So, but I think Hoboken in particular had success in creating a park that was essentially a huge basin underneath, so to address some of its issues.
Really with Hoboken's problems as well in a former life, so I know they've got issue. We've got similar issues in some areas. You know, it's we have problems. Anyway, we keep working away. But no, thanks very much. That's good. I will get some information about Cottage Street Park out for sure. I'll get that out. That's to. Sorry, I wrote the name down. Who is it again?
The
The
compliance
representative?
officer, you're in Hudson County, right?
Yeah.
Maud Snyder, Snyder.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Perfect.
And our emails follow a similar format. It's first name dot last name at dep.nj.gov, G-O-V.
Yes.
You can reach pretty much anybody at DEP using that formula.
Yeah, I know. I met many in a previous life. I did spend 1 year working for the state of New Jersey, so
Okay.
long time ago, way back.
And we'll try to remember, even though it's late in the workday for us, we'll try to remember to mention her that this issue came up and that she should be expecting an email.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you very much. It's very helpful. Thank you. Thank you. Anyway, thanks for having me along. It's been very interesting.
No, thank you. We appreciate the input. I am only seeing you and Dorothea and another DEP employee on the line, so I am going, unless you have anything else you want to add, Dorothy, I'm going to stop recording again. And we're going off the record again at 7:26. We are recording this meeting and we're going to tag your comments onto the recording we produced earlier. So go ahead.
Thank you. I really appreciate this. I had another meeting and I apologize for coming in so late, but I did want to get home to actually get onto this because I thought it was an important meeting. First of all, I just wanted to thank the department and the Green Acres program. Elizabeth Dracone, I believe, is the new director of that program. I am the city planner for the city of Bayonne. We have a very active relationship with the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. You are involved in many of our projects back from 20 years ago when we were doing the Military Ocean Terminal Bayonne, which is now the Peninsula Bayonne Harbor. We have a number of environmental protection projects in Bayonne. And of course, most people from New Jersey know that Bayonne is a peninsula of industry, but it is also probably has many of the contaminated sites from our former relationship with Standard Oil and the Texaco and the various companies, which, you know, through the 18th and 19th century was wonderful. And then unfortunately, we've had to deal with the environmental cleanup so that we can repurpose the property. I just wanted to come on to thank the state Department of Environmental Protection. I know your focus might be tonight on Green Acres. We also have a great relationship with the Green Acres program. Phil Collins has been our local liaison for many years and has done a great job with us, was very patient in helping us understand the program. We had a unique opportunity a few years ago. We actually are a CCI community collaborative initiative, which I believe was a really good initiative by the department. And through that program with Alan Miller, who was our liaison, was able to really navigate many of the, I guess, public-private partnerships that Bayonne is involved in. Having that state presence and extra effort on the department's part helped us so much with our permitting of our economic development. And also, I guess I don't know if other people from Bayonne have been on, I think they may have been, but we also had a unique opportunity. We did Resilience New Jersey with you, which was a phenomenal, for us, it was five towns or four towns and the county of Hudson. It was Bayonne, Jersey City, Hoboken, and Newark. Were part of the Resilience New Jersey effort by the department with the county of Hudson. Phenomenal program, just really, work grants, helping us understand the danger and the opportunities with sea rising of how we can protect our communities. So it was a wonderful opportunity. And we were successful in getting a brick program started in Bayonne, but also we're hoping, I believe Resilience New Jersey is going to be continued for one more year for us, which is, because of COVID. That's really, really exciting for us, and we really want to thank you for that. But I really also want to thank you, Alan Miller, who is our CCI representative until very recently. I know your program's going through reorganization, and I believe our new liaison, Alan, will stay on to do brownfields, and I believe there's a new gentleman, Vince. I'm not quite sure what his last name is. I just saw it today. So we're very welcoming to have this, relationship on many levels between Phil, Alan, and now our new rep, Vincent, who's coming on soon, and DEP and Carly from Arcadis. It's just been great. But getting back into the Green Acres program, I mean, we were one of the first communities that were able to use Green Acres, one of our Green Acres site, Fitzpatrick Park, as a retention site, a stormwater retention site. I know that was a bit unusual, but with all of the issues with the long-term control plan, I believe it was a very good effort for the department to work with us to have this happen. And I can't say enough about the commissioner who's come to Bayonne to help us out on the Togas project, which is one of the largest economic development projects. So it's a 70-acre motion picture campus that will be at the south end of Bayonne and right on the water. We are a peninsula. Many challenges with the siting of the walkways and just the raising of the site, and I don't think people thank you enough. I just wanted to come on this evening to say that on behalf of the mayor, who I know probably had other people on in the past week when you've had these things, City of Bayonne cannot thank the Department of Environmental Protection and your programs. You're out there helping us save the environment and protect our residents, and the level of cooperation that we have received from you has just been outstanding. So I would say that before the legislature, I would say that before the assembly, we would say that before the governor's office, that the commissioner and his executive staff have just been really responsive to the needs of the most southern part of Hudson County, the city of Bayonne. Just wanted to thank you.
We appreciate the thanks, and we will pass your comments along to the other programs you mentioned. Alan Miller was on the call, until
thank you.
we adjourned because we ran out of comments. And
Well,
John
I
Armstrong is still on with us.
good. I think Alan Miller had a very personal and a very important thing. I think his first grandchild was born yesterday. So
Oh,
City of Bayonne has not seen Alan since his grandson was born, but we consider him part of our Bayonne family, and we're very, very happy to hear that Colin has arrived.
Well, maybe that's why he didn't turn his camera on, but we saw that he was on the call.
Right. But
Well, again, we appreciate it.
You cannot find, I mean, the level of support from Alan Miller. I mean, the mayor has had conversations, you know, as we've done touring with the commissioner and himself in Bayonne, but the level of expertise that Alan has had and the ability to navigate a complex series of events for, you know, development is always complicated, and especially on the waterfront. And we also have we have an outstanding. I'm glad John Armstrong is on. He actually handles our long-term control plan, and I believe Andy Reichel, our environmental engineer, is not on this evening. But we have he's from Matrix New World. We really have a team that's sensitive to the issues of environmental protection, and just really, I've worked in government for many years, and it's just been an outstanding relationship with the department and the city of Bayonne. Thank you again.
You're welcome. Thank you. It is now 7:38. We're going to go back off the record. I'm going to stop the recording, but we'll resume if other members of the public join us.